Hello, I'm Bob Holland, and I'm here with members of the community supporters for Beal for the next 30 minutes to discuss the new Beal School proposal, of which we'd like you to take away three things at the end of this discussion. One is that the current Beal School is almost 100 years old and is at the end of its useful life. Secondly, the new project is the best investment for the taxpayers of Shrewsbury. And finally, your yes vote is needed on November 6th. With that said, quick introduction. My name is Bob Holland. As I said before, I'm a 1972 Shrewsbury High School graduate. I've done a number of 30 years in the Navy, another 10 or 12 years in the commercial nuclear power industry, and have been in Shrewsbury since 1964. And with that said, I'm also a town meeting member of Precinct 8, and I'm one of the Selco commissioners. With that, Jill.
Thank you. My name is Jill Wensky. I have lived in Shrewsbury since 1974. I was the school nurse at Beal School for 20 years, retiring a year ago. Prior to that, I was a critical care nurse at the UMass Memorial System for about the same period of time. So a little bit of a culture shock coming from adult critical care patients to 5-year-olds, but it was a pleasure for the most part. And I'm also a town meeting member from Precinct 9, a new one, so I'm just learning that, and a part-time volunteer at the Shrewsbury Senior Center.
Great. Henry?
Hello, I'm Henry Fitzgerald. I've been in town since 1977. I have 2 children, went through the Shrewsbury school systems and are now older and married and off on their own. I have spent a lot of time in very different programs in town. Including most recently 2 terms as a selectman in town. But probably more important for this discussion is the approximate 20 years I spent either as a member or the chairman of the school building committee, of which we built 4 schools, starting with Floral Street, then the high school, Oak Middle School, which was a conversion of the high school, and then the Sherwood project. On top of that, I'm a member of Precinct 6, and have enjoyed my work with this committee immensely.
Oh, great. Well, thanks. A little bit of background about the project is that the current Beal School is approximately 100 years old and at the end of its useful life. We'll get into that a little bit later. Over the past 96 years, there have been no major renovations that have been made to the building, which currently serves as the Early Childhood Center, which houses approximately 300 people, students per day, which approximately 50 of those are first graders that have overflow from the Floral Street School. The Beal School building faces the critical infrastructure and system issues. It has no working mechanical ventilation system to bring in fresh air from the outside, no sprinkler systems, lacks appropriate space for learning, and provides challenges for those with mobility needs. So that's an intro to the conditions of it. Also, we've been accepted, fortunately, we've been accepted into the Massachusetts School Building Association's program as one of 26 awardees, having competed with 97 various school districts to gain funding from the state for this project. Henry will talk a little bit more about the issues on that, but basically it's about a $33 million plus up in support for a school. And then based on the student enrollment growth projections, the Shrewsbury School Committee voted to pursue plans for a new K-4 school back in October of 2017. And this new school is proposed to have 790 students in an elementary school to relieve overcrowding and provide parity across all the elementary schools. This also includes classroom space required for the district to offer full-day kindergarten for all students. So with that, there's some discussion a little bit on why we whether we chose this site versus any of the others. Henry, do you get any comment on that?
Well, I know that there was a study done of approximately 30 sites around town looking at various details before they found that or centered on the Glavin site. I think for most people who know the site and know the soccer fields next to it, know that it's really an ideal location. Mm-hmm. It's pretty centrally located. It has facilities on the site that will come down and be replaced by a new school building. But I think the access to it, the land area adjacent to it, which is very critical for elementary schools, made it a top choice. And of course, we're getting this from the state. at an unbelievable bargain. So it makes this all the right decisions, and I really applaud the committee for doing the diligence they did over the course of probably a year and a half of studying all the sites and coming to this. So I think it's by far the best location for what we're doing.
Yeah, I think it kind of came down to the last two, is that you had the Centec site as
Right.
well as, but it seemed that we really wanted to keep that as a commercial development potential in the future, and additionally the central location of the Glavin Center, obviously with transportation and whatnot, compared to what we see at Beal now.
Absolutely.
For dropping off the kids, it works out pretty well. Hey, Jill, you worked at the Beal School for 20 years,
Yes,
a
I
mere
did.
20 years.
Yeah.
And so,
By like a flash.
yeah. Can you give us a little rundown what you saw and what your take is on the current state of the building?
Sure. We had a little discussion before we came on air, and I just want to repeat that Beal Early Childhood Center, during my 20 years and the few years before my joining them, will always be thought of in only a positive way. Beal will have its own legacy for delivering quality education, as all our other schools do. Not without challenges, and that would be the building itself, remembering that there's, do you want me to keep going?
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
That the children are 5 years old. And from a medical standpoint, from a nursing standpoint, health and safety, most of these children have only been toilet trained, for one thing, for 2 years, give or take. And one of the biggest challenges in Beal is the bathroom facilities. That's getting down to the brass tacks of what one of our big challenges is, that there weren't enough. If you were 5 years old and playing and having a good time and you needed to use the facilities, the chances of you getting to do that without having an accident, seriously, were slim. I could give you a lot of statistics about 90 boys feeding into 2 urinals, but that's about, it's
I guess
things-
that's getting down to the
well,
nitty-gritty.
I know, and unfortunately, I guess nursing always has that. That's our angle, but it's so important. So many of these children weren't thrilled about coming to school or were apprehensive. A lot of them wanted to come, and most of them were happy once they were there. But nothing worse than having a bathroom accident when you were already apprehensive about being in school.
Sure.
Yeah, there's other issues like just the classroom size,
Yeah.
the availability of, there's no ventilation, I think, is set up in the school, correct?
Right, and very uneven
Natural.
heating.
just-
Yeah, right.
It's all natural,
Well,
right?
there was a time in the winter where we had snow coming through the bricks on the second floor. That was repaired, but that would be our natural ventilation. Heating was very uneven. You could be in a classroom that was 90 degrees, hard to study or teach in that kind of an environment, or on a 3-day weekend when we come back on Monday, the teachers and the students, many of them have their jackets on until like 11 o'clock in the morning. I'd probably say there wasn't another school
Yeah.
that had that issue.
Seems like, going through the center of town too, which is already under study because of the traffic and whatnot.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got 300 students that are there now, and it's including changing out for half kindergarten in the middle of the day
Right.
and whatnot, the traffic that builds up there. It's a small acre, I think it's 4 acres that this
That's
school
it.
actually sits on. I think the Glavin Center is going to be 15 acres, which
Wow.
you're going to
Sure.
leave that, for anybody, any and all folks that want to bring their children to school, they'll be able to queue up and not, shut down the center of town in doing that.
Yeah.
So,
I just want to add, though, to your comment about infrastructure. Not only the 6 years I was on the Board of Selectmen, but for probably 20 years prior, we always talked about things that we could and should be done at the school. Now, I think probably the most major thing that was done was replacing a boiler 30 years ago.
In Beal.
Yeah.
In Beal. So it really hasn't seen the level of financial and physical support that the other schools had, mostly because we've always felt that it was going to be the one school that was likely to be replaced, and you're not likely to want to put a lot of capital into a building that's even 20, 30 years ago was quite old, and saying this isn't really going to be suited for the next generation of educational learners that we have. So it suffered a bit from always being on that edge of the next project,
Yeah.
but never quite getting there.
Yeah.
But now is the time.
Well, you know, and those might say, well, why don't we just add on to the school? You know, you get 300 kids there now.
Right.
The new school, new Beal, is going to be set up for 790, which by all estimates, if you use the current footprint of the old Beal School, you'd have to put 4 floors onto the thing,
Right.
and it would have no area for parking, which just it makes it untenable to be able to even use that site to begin with.
Or
And again,
playing.
playing for that matter. And then obviously all the infrastructure issues with a 100-year-old building kind of goes there. Well, okay, with that said, Henry, you've been involved with a lot of these capital projects, and both in Shrewsbury and beyond, and the construction costs related to the Beal project are higher than what we recall from Sherwood and the public library, and the reimbursement costs are lower. And can you explain a little bit of that?
Yeah, well, I think it's worth remembering where we were when we began the Sherwood project. We were right in the middle of the financial meltdown that started with real estate, if you recall, and went through the stock market and others, and really created a 3 or 4 year run of a recession in our country. Consequently, when we were building Sherwood, we couldn't have timed it from a construction cost point of view any better. A project that was originally thinking, this is prior to us getting actual costs, we thought it'd be something like $47 million. But by the time that all was said and done and we had our approvals, we built the school for just shy of $40 million. That hardly ever happens, but it was really due to a unique time in our economy and the ways that we're going. The other thing was, prior to us starting that project, if you recall, a lot of the construction people were having a difficult time, and there were a lot of layoffs in the industry. The teams that we had working with us were very much bent on keeping a project on pace to get their pay, to keep the work that they had. There were no real extras in the project for which people were looking for extras, pretty much just stayed on course. And so in that regard, we not only had the right skill sets of the highest quality people that were still working at the time, but who had a mindset to get it done right and get it done quickly, and hopefully they get the next job that was coming along. So a lot of that had to go with where we were. But that's really just a reminder for people who might think, well, here we are now, a number of years later, so that the Sherwood opened up in 2012, a little bit ahead of schedule. However, here we are now where it's completely reversed. So those costs on a square foot basis are considerably higher. I won't say quite double, but pretty close to being double of where we were in that short period of time. Part of it was because they regressed their costs and their cost structure so much to allow us to come up to sell a project, and now where we are now is companies, quite frankly, have more work than they can handle. So it's a totally different environment. And working in a different structure. That was the first program. I don't want to take up too much time, but that was the first program we did with the new program under the MSBA. And I'll say that only because we had our last project before that, Oak, was under this old program called SBAB. Those were 2 state projects, but for which, under SBAB, there were something like 800 projects backed up in their system and $10 billion worth of debt that had been accumulated over time. This new set came on board 2004, but it took a few years, took almost 3 years for it to get fully enacted. And in that period, they tried to close out all those old projects and get their debt down so they could come up with these new way of doing projects. The significance of that, for which I'll try to keep us on track, is that they came up with a new set of rules. And what their rules were going to say is, we'll reimburse you starting with a basis of so much, generally give or take 50% of a given project depending on your community. And there's points awarded for things that you can do and deductions for things that are ineligible. So, if you use the project management at risk structure, you got a point for that. if you did certain green elements in the building,
Which we're doing with the
which
LED.
were these
right,
with the lighting and the other things that Selco will be very involved in, you got points for that. There's a couple of more points. On the other hand, they don't want to pay for things like road work and site work and others, and they limit it. So consequently, you might start at a certain number, and for which they have limits on all this. So our total reimbursement for this project is some about $30 million, maybe $33 million. And it represents maybe about 35% of the cost of the project. So I say that so people understand we're in a new set of rules. We're working it very well, and I think that process has worked really well for the town of Shrewsbury. And we should understand, simply because the project costs are higher, that kind of comes along for the ride with all project costs growing as they have. So I think it's important for us to have a little bit of history and what's involved. We may have, for example, at the high school had a 50% reimbursement rate. However, even with the 50% reimbursement rate, you have a much bigger school, a larger project to begin with. So I think that's enough to kind of touch on that one and give some background to it.
Yeah, I think another concern would be is that are we building a big enough school? And I think with the 790 student capacity that this is going to do, it looks, at first blush, what's come forward in this plan is that we're actually going to be able to relieve the stress on the other three or four elementary schools.
Sure.
Bring the class sizes down, bring K through full day kindergarten to all the school, to all elementary school, which I think is
Great
huge.
point.
And
It's
a
a
great
great
point. And the fact that to be more community located and centric and whatnot. I mean, especially making sure that they've got the music rooms, the art, the nursing facilities, the bathrooms, the facility, the things that are really going to be important for this, and seeing where we go on that. So
I think the importance that you said again is another one of those rules that I was talking about, and that is when you're doing enrollment projections, where did that come from? And the state uses a set of its own calculations along with town information to come up with an appropriate number that fits all the parameters to help you along the way to make sure you're right-sized. I would say that we didn't do that in other schools, but the process is much more refined now, and I think we can better appreciate that this school is being right-sized for what we need.
yeah, I think it provides first off, it provides a long-term solution. Here's a school that be opened I guess probably September, October of 2021, should it get approved this year to get into that. And it'd be there for quite some time to be able to do that. It does seem to be fiscally responsible. Even you were talking about in today's world with the increased costs and whatnot, they've taken a look at every MSBA's requirements and space and limitations and whatnot, what they actually mandate that we have to make sure we have, so we make sure we have the space for the kids in the future. It is a shared investment. I mean, we're getting, $33 million from the state as far as making that happen, which we're not guaranteed we're going to be able to keep if we don't vote this in favor of this year, because this is the second time we've gone to the well on this school and had the monies in a competition, like we said earlier, of over 90 communities to be one of the 26 that got chosen. We can't be guaranteed we would get that kind of money in the future, so we really have to jump on that. It benefits all of us in the community, because it's certainly like the Lavin area will be improved, the school will be there. It opens up the center of town again for development, for for better use of the facilities there.
Sure.
It seems like it with the fields that are up there, and it kind of makes it more of a uniformly usable facility, because you got soccer fields and all the other stuff that are there. Plus now you have more meeting space for PTO and the like, which you kind of restricted in Beal. Plus I don't even know how they do a PTO when you're only there for 1 year. It's kind of hard
difficult.
to difficult to even make that happen.
And one thing I want to, a point that you made, but I want to emphasize a bit more. We went from an early childhood center to a K-4 building. On the surface, that is an obvious change, but for other people, they should realize it relieves the pressure on all the other elementary schools, because we're taking populations and smoothing out the curve. So schools that are currently experiencing that crowding will get relief from this project, and I think that's a second very important benefit of this project going forward.
Yeah, and I think on another light too, as the town tries to become greener, here's a prime example where we're trying to meet all the requirements for LEED, getting the advantages from the state payments for that, but it's a school for the future that's going to be better self-sustaining and be, in the infrastructure and whatnot, and be able to make that happen. And then the other thing I guess we got to keep in mind too is that this is a debt exclusion. This is not a Prop 2.5 override, right? So for whatever, usually a 20-year
type of mortgage.
So so once that, whatever the cost to the community is that we vote in to support this school, that is amortized over the 20 years, and then comes off of the payrolls for the debts scheme. And as this school comes on, there's other schools that are going to be coming off the debt. The high school and is it?
I would think certainly Floral is coming off, and the high school is coming off.
Spring Street's coming off. I think was it the Parker School thing? We did renovations down there. They're coming off.
There's a lot of little things. The idea that we absorb debt, I think it's a bad idea to wait till projects are so bad that you need to do 3 or 4 of them at the same time. I think the idea should be that we spread the projects out thoughtfully and do projects as they're needed every 3 or 4 years, 5 years, on a scale that we're talking about. I'm not talking about a window replacement or something like that. I'm talking about some major project, so for which the retiring debt is replaced by new debt, and that we keep a nice cycle going so we understand where we are and we're not shocked into a place where suddenly your tax bill changes greatly in any given year. Keeping in mind, initially the first few years are your highest cost, and then these costs will go down over time.
Yeah. And keeping in mind too, it's not just schools that this whole involves. I mean, there are other infrastructure things. We've had the fire department buildings that we've done, the library, the police station in the future. That's got to also, all these things have to be mixed, put into the stew to find out what's going on. But it appears right now that the number one priority that should be done now, so that and not deferred, is this Beal School project. With that said, there's a couple of things that we got to make sure is that everybody understands is that one, town meeting, of which we're members, will vote on Monday, October 22nd, for the actual funding for the school to approve the spending of whatever the price is that comes up. But that's only part of the problem, and that takes 2/3 majority of not majority, but 2/3 of all the town meeting members present, as long as there was a quorum to approve that. But the big one, and why we're actually here to talk with you folks tonight or today, is that the town then has to vote on the debt exclusion, and that would occur on Tuesday, November 6th. The issue on that one is that it's a little tricky because that's also the state or the normal every November municipal, the state re-elections or that occur. And this is a town one that's normally the municipal things would be done in like May. Problem is that if town meeting approves on the 22nd of October to spend the money, the 29th MSBA approves us to get that money, and then we have 120 days from that approval to actually show that we funded it. So we have to get it in. So the most economical way of doing it was doing it at the same time. So when voters go to the polls on November 6th, then they'll actually get 2 ballots. They'll get one for the state elections that are there, but also there'll be a second ballot, yes or no, for the debt exclusion. And you'll have to check in. It'll be the same table. They're going to have 2 sets of books. You're going to check in twice as you go down and have 2 ballots. You can still put it, from what I'm told, you can still put it all in the same ballot machine that separates which ballots are for what. So we'll get the count there, but that's going to have to be done.
But we only need 50.
We only need 50%
plus one more.
Plus one for that.
Okay.
Right. So it's 2/3 for the town meeting, and it's 50% for plus one for the overall debt exclusion. Additionally, there's going to be early voting this time because it's a state election. You can't do it in the municipal, but I think starting around the 22nd of October, you actually go up, something like that. You can go up and do the. Get your ballot, go up and early vote actually at the town hall. Also, they just sent out a notice today from the town clerk that absentee ballots for the state election can be requested. And I went up and talked with her, and she said within another week or two they'll have the new ballots
Right.
for the debt exclusion, so you'll actually be able to vote absentee on that as well. So there's all sorts of opportunities, no reason not to vote, and most importantly is to make sure that you vote yes on the debt exclusion, which would be on the 6th of November. Hey, we got a few minutes, just real quick, anything else you want to make sure we cover on Beal or the new Beal?
The new Beal.
Would it bring you out of retirement to come up and be the first school nurse at the new Beal?
Well, a certain amount of excitement getting to get in on the planning and the design. And if I had one more thing about the old Beal to say, it would be that my old office was about, this is true, 8 feet by 11 feet in size, which is quite a trick when you have more than one child that's ill. But to jump over the voting, the people in Shrewsbury are wonderful. I think we've seen that in terms of their response to anything. You know, there's questions and maybe there's concerns, but they're wonderful in responding to what our needs are, you know. And I think we look at the turf project that is going on now, and it was a response by people in town that were interested and wanted to help for the
Privately funded,
betterment.
yep.
And but what concerns me a little, since I'm older, is the people need to get out and vote, and that's something that's, we always vote at 5 minutes of 8 p.m. because we like to see how many people have voted.
Yeah.
And we live in a 55 and older condo here in Shrewsbury, and trust me when I say everyone votes.
Yeah.
And I'm pleased to say everyone is supportive,
Oh, great.
as far as I know.
Well,
And
we hope that continues. Henry,
I would just like to say from my own experience in doing project after project, waiting is not a good option. I think if we wait and hope for something better to come along, about the only thing that's likely to happen is a project that's delayed and going to cost more at a future time. I think this is as good a time right now. The economy is strong for the most part. I think most of the people in our town have jobs and are doing reasonably well. And you know, when people have always said to me in the past, some other projects, you know, this is a tough economic time, I'm thinking to myself, it's never going to get any better than it is now. So I'm hoping that people keep that in mind and remember now's the right time for this project.
No, I couldn't agree more with you on that. Well, Jill, thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Henry,
Thank you.
as always.
You're very welcome.
As we wrap up the show, I really do want to go back to the 3 points that we really wanted to discuss over this last half hour. Was one, that the current Beal School is almost 100 years old, and it's at the end of useful life. And I think we've covered some of that and made our points as to why we need something new, in this new developed, studied Beal School, be at the Glavin Center, is the answer to that, because the new project is the best investment for the taxpayers of Shrewsbury, as we've discussed. Now's the time to build, to continue a steady building rate throughout the town in this slot, with $33 million from the state, not to be guaranteed for the future, that we need to take the opportunity now and build and build this school. And then finally, the fact that we need your yes vote on November 6th. Additionally, if you're so inclined, you can reach out to your town meeting members, just to make sure that they also express their appreciation for your voting for them by voting for the 2/3 majority requirement for the funding as well at the town meeting that's going to be on the 22nd of October. So mark your calendars, 6th November, get to the polls and vote for yes for the new Beal School. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.